My name is Kelly Arford-Horne. I am the Archaeological Site Director here at Historic Germanna. I've been here about 5 years. This is actually my 6th digging season here. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of Germanna and how that ties into the archaeology that we are doing. So we are here having a nice intimate picnic. As some of you may know, I know at least one of you does know, this organization, Historic Germanna, had its beginnings in simple gatherings like this one. Starting in the 1950s, an intimate group of families gathered here once a year at this very location to enjoy good food and share a passion for a common interest, just like we're doing here today. The common interest for that group was the shared experiences of their ancestors who lived in and around Fort Germanna. For any of you not familiar with that history, in 1714, 42 German immigrants settled just across the road from here at a fort called Fort Germanna, which was constructed under the direction of then Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood. A few years later, a second colony of Germans would settle close by. Descendants of what is known as the first and second colony of Germans purchased this property where we are right now in the 1950s so they could have a dedicated location to reunite with friends and family and celebrate the accomplishments of those immigrant ancestors. As historians, we all know that place is a very important thing, and having a place of shared history with others, a community, is a very powerful experience. Where we are now has been that place of community for Germanna's German descendants for the past 3/4 of a century. If you have a moment, I would encourage you to walk down our chimney and witness trail, which is just beyond the pavilion here. If you bear left at the fork in the path, you will see a 10 by 10 foot concrete pad that is known as the speaker's platform. That very platform is the spot from which impassioned speakers addressed gatherings during those first years of reunions and picnics with talks such as the 4 cornerstones of the Germanna Foundation, which was presented by the first president of the organization, Charles Huffman. The 4 cornerstones, if you're wondering, in his speech were courage, independence, craftsmanship, and democracy. Directly behind the pad is a witness tree, a tulip poplar old enough to have seen the weary but resilient armies crossing the Rapidan at Germanna Ford during the Civil War. Behind the witness tree, you will see, encased in some kind of major overgrowth right now, 2 steadfast brick chimneys dating to the late 1700s and the Urquhart milling complex that was present on this property starting around that time. It was in that historic setting of the witness tree and the chimneys and Germanna Ford that those first reunions took place here. And we are very fortunate to have someone here with us today who remembers those early years of picnics and reunions at Germanna. David Brown is not only one of our amazing volunteers, but he is also a descendant of those 18th century German settlers. I thought instead of hearing me recount those second-hand details of those first picnics, you might want to hear first-hand accounts from someone who was there. So I will pass things off to David for a moment, and he can regale you with stories of those first picnics.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah. I don't know how much regaling I'm going to do, but I can do some reminiscing that might mean something to you. Germanna's in my blood. Germanna's in my DNA. Not only because I'm a descendant of a Martin who came into Germanna in 1714, but because Martins lived here up until about 40 years ago, and I think one of them is still living, and maybe 2. And I became, because of my heritage, my family instilled in me an appreciation for the fact that we had ancestors who came here and faced an entirely new world, quite different from what they left in Europe. They were thrown out here onto the frontier, And literally it was the frontier. And they didn't have a whole lot more to work with than whatever tools they could get their hands on, and the dirt that stood on, and the trees that stood around them. But that's been instilled to me, and that's part of my value system and part of what I really appreciate. But I think what Kelly wanted me to share with you most about is my own experience as far as Germanna is concerned, because when I was a child, the Germanna Association, well, we call it the association. It was different names at different times. It was a foundation. It was a society. And anyway, it's always been the same thing in my thinking. But when I was small, we used to make a big issue out of coming to the Germanna annual functions. It started out back in the 50s, or at least my memory of it, as the annual picnic. And it wasn't just a picnic. There would be speakers. There would be business transacted in terms of where the organization was going to go. But as a child, that didn't mean anything to me quite so much as all the food they brought. Because everybody brought food, and it was just like a big old church social. There was plenty of fried chicken and ham and biscuits and potato salad and cakes and pies and corn pudding and all the other good stuff that country folks make. And that was always a big deal, how much food it was to eat. Now, as a child, I didn't have any interest in the business. I didn't have any interest in the speeches. All I had interest in was meeting with other people that were descendants of the same people mine were descendants of. And while everybody was doing something else, we kind of like to go down to the river and wade in the water and look for arrowheads and mussel shells. But I can recall that it was always in the summertime. It's usually around the 4th of July. It was always hot. But then it didn't bother us too much because we didn't live in air conditioning. We didn't work in air conditioning. We didn't go to school in air conditioning. It was hot, and that was just the way it was. It was summertime. It was supposed to be hot, and we endured without realizing what we were actually enduring. When we would come down here, it seemed like every year would be a few more people than there were the year before, and that was always a good thing because it also meant that there was a little more food than there was the year before. And in addition to that, in those days, culture was a little bit different from what it is now. We didn't come to these things in our work clothes or our play clothes. We came in our church clothes. The ladies all wore dresses. Some of them wore hats. Men all wore coats and ties. Now, they took the coats off sometimes because it was so hot, but it was a cultural thing, and you dressed up to go on the picnics, and so it was a big deal. It wasn't just an ordinary ho-hum activity. While we were here, we would at one point, and I can't remember which years exactly, Mr. J.B. Carpenter, who was a hardware store owner in Culpeper, had built a swing of types that was put up out here so that the kids would have something to do other than stand around and say, when are we going home? And I can remember that swing, and exactly where it was located, I don't know. The platform Kelly was just telling you about, I remember that very clearly, and you roll 5 or 6 chairs up there and that many speakers on it. My own personal experience that in about 1957, it became the foundation of, what was it? I wrote it down. The foundation, the Memorial Foundation of the Germanna colonies in Virginia in 1957 was the first annual reunion. That left a lot to the succeeding people to deal with and come up to, but it was the first annual. And ever since then, there was a big program every year, and it involved a picnic, it involved speakers. But over the years, it evolved into something a little bit bigger. It became more of a conference or convention type of thing, and it would be spread out over several days. But during the years between about 1957, 58, and 1973 or 74, my involvement and my participation was pretty limited. Part of the time because I worked on Sundays. I was a pastor in a church. You can understand why I was detained elsewhere. And then, sorry to say, the ensuing years after that, financially, we were not able to pay our membership dues every year. So anyway, by probably around 80 or thereabout, we were able to become more involved with Germanna. And what really helped me to get more involved with Germanna was in 2020, I retired. And so one of my goals was to be able to put more into Germanna. So for the last several years, I've been volunteering with Germanna, working with the archaeological department and volunteering to odds and ends of work at Salubria and things like that. And someone told me, asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm working with the archaeological department. He says, what do you do? I said, we look for and catalog artifacts. And he said, how long you been involved with Germanna? I said, my whole life. He said, you're pretty much an artifact yourself, aren't you? I said, well, yes, actually I am. I'm a living artifact. Germanna, as I said, is in my blood. It's in my genes. I enjoy working here. I enjoy the fact that we all consider ourselves part of one big family. That's hard to do as the family gets bigger, but we all have that same connection to the soil, the same connection to the community. And there's a certain amount of community attitude and spirit that still remains with us. And for me, I know that same sense will accompany for as long as I'm standing on this ground. Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
All right, that was great. Moving on, I was told that this was not the first time the Historical Society has had their picnic here. Is that right? Somebody told me that you all were here about 10 years ago, and I wasn't here 10 years ago. But this place was a very different place. If you were here, one of those people who was here 10 years ago, our archaeology program had just begun, and the property across the road containing the site of the Enchanted Castle and the fort had just been acquired by Germanna. Dr. Eric Larson had just been hired to search for Fort Germanna, and this building, the Hitt Archaeological Center, was not here. It was constructed in 2018. So Dr. Larson is still here, and we are still searching for Fort Germanna because it takes a long time to find a fort. But over the years, we have expanded our investigations and research to include the complete history of the property. So when I say the complete history, what I mean is that we are no longer just limiting our focus to those several years of occupation of the fort by the Germans, but we are open to exploring and researching evidence of any and all occupations on the property that we encountered during archaeology. And that, in my mind, is just a wonderful experience to really get to know this place and its people. So when the Germans settled on the property in 1714, indigenous people had been living here for thousands of years before them. They left archaeological remains like stone tools and fish weirs along the river. After the Germans left, Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood had construction started on his Enchanted Castle house. That was around 1720, just 6 years after the Germans settled at Fort Germanna. Dozens of skilled tradespeople, indentured servants, and people who were enslaved worked several years to construct the house. Alexander Spotswood lived there alone at first, then with his wife, Butler Brain, and their 4 children. Dozens of servants and enslaved workers lived and worked on the property with them, supporting the household. The Spotswood family and their indentured servants and those who were enslaved left archaeological remains like 12 tons of bricks, 14,000 fragments of window glass, thousands of fragments of ceramics and bottles, sewing pins and buttons, cooking implements, and thousands of other objects that are evidence of their remarkable lives and experiences, including one very special artifact that came from Africa, a cowrie shell. You can see that cowrie shell and a sampling of those other artifacts from the Enchanted Castle inside our lab today. Around the same time the house was constructed, Spotsylvania County was formed. In 1721, Germanna was made the first county seat of Spotsylvania. Just 200 feet from Spotswood's then partially constructed Enchanted Castle house, construction began for a church, jail, and a courthouse. The short time period where Germanna was the county seat of Spotsylvania County is probably the pinnacle of the population growth in this immediate area, and that still holds for today. We have the Spotswood household. So we have the Spotswood household with the family and the servants and the enslaved who are working at the house and in the surrounding agricultural fields. Then we likely have tradespeople and others living and working in the town of Germanna at the same time. Last year, we held a special program marking the 300th anniversary of the official opening of that first Spotsylvania County Courthouse at Germanna. The first cases heard there were on September 1st, 1724, and the very first entry in the order book for that courthouse is a series of depositions surrounding the actions of a Saponi man named Sawney. Those depositions give us a glimpse into who was living and working in the town at the time. We hear in those depositions from the ordinary keepers, John and Catherine Finlayson, as well as William Fraser, who was a servant of Spotswood's. We also see depositions from a William Barnes, John Arnold, John Lee, and Peter Corbin, who were all present in the town during Sawney's visit, but we don't know who they were or what their business was there. Much like the occupation of the fort, the town of Germanna was very short-lived. The county seat was moved to Fredericksburg in 1732, just 8 years after those first court cases. During his visit to Germanna that same year, the county seat was moved from Germanna. William Byrd wrote in his journal, "This famous town consists of Colonel Spotswood's Enchanted Castle on one side of the street and a baker's dozen of ruinous tenements on the other, where so many German families had dwelt some years ago. There had also been a chapel about a bow shot from the colonel's house at the end of an avenue of cherry trees, but some pious people had lately burnt it down." So we get a feeling from this description that Germanna and perhaps even Alexander Spotswood were beginning to fade from prominence at this time. But that's okay. We don't have to be sad about that. This, in my mind, is what makes Germanna such a fascinating place to study. The town of Germanna is a snapshot in time, this remarkable opportunity to study a very specific period in Virginia's history. The town of Germanna thrived because of its transient presence on the periphery of the colonial settlement. It was a frontier that lingered very briefly here at the Rapidan before moving on. So what does that look like? What has archaeology revealed about that snapshot in Virginia's history? We are currently digging inside the foundation of what is believed to be that very first Spotsylvania County Courthouse, where those depositions about Sawney were recorded, although we have not found clear evidence to support that interpretation yet. If you have visited the site, you will know the foundation is very deep, about 5 feet deep, and filled almost completely with stone rubble from the collapse of the structure. It takes a very long time, as George can attest, for our excavators to dig beneath that stone rubble. And so things are moving very slowly. We have removed about 7 tons of stone rubble so far by hand. It's a lot of work. What we have found beneath that layer of collapse are hand-blown bottle bases, window glass, hundreds of smoking pipe fragments, and window lead stamped with the year 1717. We have also recovered a mug that has the appearance of coming from the workshop of William Rogers, who was the poor potter of Yorktown, although we have not verified that yet. So these are exciting things. These are the very first steps to bringing that snapshot of Virginia's history into view. We are also currently attempting to identify locations of other structures within the town. Due to intensive earth-moving activity that took place on the property in the 1980s, LiDAR has not been very helpful in our search for those structures. What we see on LiDAR images, for the most part, is evidence of that recent disturbance. The area is heavily wooded and not conducive to testing with ground-penetrating radar. And we have determined our best option has been to test the area with shovel test pits, which are small holes excavated on a grid across the area. These will help us to narrow down what areas we want to open bigger excavation pits and hopefully find those additional structures. We're still in the process of doing this. All right, so what happened to Germanna after it was no longer the county seat of Spotsylvania? As we all know, Orange County was formed 1734, and a new Orange County courthouse was constructed a little west of here near Raccoon Ford. Several years later, in 1740, Alexander Spotswood died suddenly in Annapolis as he was preparing to lead colonial troops against the Spanish in Cartagena. The enchanted castle burned 10 years after his death in 1750, although there were likely no full-time Spotswood family residents in the house at that time. After 1750 on the property, we likely have what I like to think of as these kind of impressive, romantic, tumbling ruins of the enchanted castle alongside the quaint, charming remnants of the courthouse and the small surrounding town. And there were likely not many people living there after the house burned. We do see mention of a ferry operator who is operating the ferry across the Rapidan here in the second half of the 1700s that ran not far from where the bridge is now. We do not see evidence of others until about the 1790s, and that is when the Gordon family purchases the property and constructs a house very near those romantic tumbling ruins of the enchanted castle. The Gordon family and their relatives and descendants lived on the property for about 100 years. James Gordon, the first Gordon resident of Germanna, attended the Virginia Ratifying Convention of 1788 alongside James Madison as a representative of Orange County. This was before he moved to Germanna. Under his ownership and throughout the first half of the 1800s, the Gordons enslaved many people to work on their plantation. As far as we know, enslavement ended on the property in 1852 when sister and brother Elizabeth and Armistead Gordon both died very suddenly. In her will, Elizabeth manumitted 36 people who she was enslaving and had them sent to Liberia. We have a small exhibit in the Hitt Archaeological Center detailing what we have been able to learn about those individuals who were sent from Orange County to Liberia. It's an absolutely fascinating story, and I could talk about it for hours. But instead, I will encourage you to go inside and take a look at the exhibit. All right, so this kind of brings me to where we are right now, our current archaeological work. Last year, Historic Germanna was awarded a grant through the state to study Virginia's Black, Indigenous, and people of color history, BIPOC history. This has helped us to focus our archaeological investigations on those areas of the property where we are most likely to find those BIPOC resources. And this summer, we focused on identifying the east dependencies of the enchanted castle. So the dependencies were the support structures of the house where indentured servants and people who were enslaved and their families would have lived and worked. The west dependencies have been excavated previously. The southwest dependency is where we recovered that wonderful cowrie shell. The east dependencies have been more of an unknown. They had not been previously excavated. The bonus of digging in this area was that it overlaps with the yard of the Gordon house. That means we had the potential to encounter work areas from both the Gordon and Spotswood era occupations of the property and could potentially investigate experiences related to people who were enslaved on the property in both the early 1700s and the early 1800s. We excavated about 25 by 5 foot test units in the vicinity of where the east dependencies of the enchanted castle should be located. That's assuming the house was constructed in the symmetrical Georgian style, which we have always believed to be the case. However, we did not find any clear evidence of those dependencies. The west dependencies, when excavated, had brick and stone foundations with significant architectural elements inside, such as deep cellar pits and kitchen and laundry features. We found nothing like that in any of our excavations on the east side of the house this year. We do not know what happened to the east dependencies. We did, however, find a pit related to the 1800s Gordon occupation of the property. We are still in the process of excavating that feature, which was about 5 feet wide and 6 feet long and about 1.5 feet deep. That pit contains thousands of animal bones, fish scales, and eggshells. It also contains utensils, a spoon, knife, and fork, which you may have seen if you follow our Facebook page. There were dozens of straight pins, along with buttons and thimbles and ceramics and bottles of all shapes and decorations. Because we are still in the process of digging this feature and processing these artifacts, we don't have any final conclusions about what the meaning and use of this pit was. But all I can tell you is that it is unique, it is chock full of artifacts, and it is really fun to dig. Right, George? George is digging it. Last week, we excavated a post hole adjacent to the pit. Turned upside down in the hole were 2 jars. One was embossed with the name of the Cohansey glass manufacturers. The Cohansey jars had clamps on the lids, much like the bale lid jars you see today. They were used to create a more airtight lock for storing things like fruit and keeping it from spoiling. These jars tend to date to the late 1800s. However, the location of ours suggests it was placed in the hole after the associated structure was no longer in use. So the post for the structure was pulled, and the jars were kind of shoved down in that hole and then filled back in with dirt. There does not seem to be a clear reason for why the jars were placed in that hole. I was kind of hoping for some treasure or maybe like a secret map or something like that, but there was nothing, just the jars. All right, so all of these artifacts that I have talked about today, we have a sampling of them on display in our lab. I would like to invite you in to see those jars and the cowrie shell and the window lead stamped with the 1717 year. We also have artifacts from the courthouse and Enchanted Castle excavations from the 1990s when the house was excavated by the University of Mary Washington. I would also like to invite you to attend one of our Friday archaeology walks, which are coming up in October, which is Archaeology Month. One of our archaeological staff will walk you around the site and show you recent finds. You will be able to see that Gordon-era pit with all the artifacts. You'll also be able to see the courthouse foundation and anything else that we are excavating that week. All right, so thank you all for coming. Thank you, David, for your wonderful recalling. And George, I think, is going to give you all a tour of the lab if you are interested in that. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. I'm always happy to answer questions. I like doing that more than public speaking. So one-on-one is great for me. Yes?
In the area that y'all believe contains the courthouse feature, is there any evidence of that building burning, or did it just kind of naturally decay in place and fall in, and then other debris kind of piled on top of it?
So that's an excellent question. We have encountered a burn layer. So the interesting thing about the burn layer we have encountered is that there are no burned artifacts within the burn layer. So we have this layer, very thick layer of charcoal, but we don't have burned window glass or burned nails or architectural elements that might be a sign that the building actually burned. So that is something we are still investigating. Is this charcoal moved from somewhere else? Is it related to something else? Or are we actually seeing an episode where the structure burned? We only have a couple of test units open right now, so that's one of our research questions. Yeah.
I noticed you didn't mention the discovery of iron, or the mining of iron, or the smelting of iron. And did you find any? Have you found any evidence right here of that? Or no?
So no, so that was about 10 or 13 miles away. The Tubal Ironworks. Those Germans were brought here to start the iron mining industry for Spotswood, which they did, and that I think is probably a pretty amazing site. but we don't see any evidence of that here at this location. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This is great. So nice to see you all here today.